The ocean exhaled beneath a slate-gray sky, each wave crashing against the rocks below like a forgotten memory returning from the deep. The wind carried salt and silence through the gnarled cypress trees, wrapping the rugged coastline in a veil of mist. Fog clung to everything, the branches, the grass, the soul. On the edge of it all stood a man, still as a gravestone. Thomas Wren. His silhouette wrapped in an old wool coat was nearly swallowed by the morning gloom. The cold didn't bother him, neither did the loneliness. He had made peace with both. What he hadn't made peace with, what never left him, was the sound of a little girl's laugh echoing in the back of his mind, fading into a scream that had never been found. Wren had once been a legend among detectives. They called him the Bloodhound, not out of mockery, but reverence. He could trace the truth through lies the way a dog could smell fear in the dark. He didn't miss clues, he didn't stop, he didn't fail. Until he did. The Morley case had shattered something in him. 8-year-old Laura Morley had vanished from a suburban neighborhood on a day that had started like any other. Sunlight, sidewalk chalk, an unlocked back gate. She was just gone. Wren had poured himself into that investigation, body, mind, soul, and when the weeks dragged on with nothing but dead ends and decaying hope, something inside him collapsed. The media feasted, the department bled, and Wren, the unbreakable, resigned. That was 3 years ago. Since then, he'd lived alone in a small cabin perched above the sea, a structure more wood and regret than brick and mortar. No neighbors, no visitors, no cases, just tides and time. He spent his mornings walking the cliffs, not to clear his head, that was a lost cause, but to feel the earth beneath his feet and pretend it still mattered. He carried a flask in one pocket and a dog-eared notebook in the other, though he hadn't written in it in over a year. What was left to say? The cabin's phone hadn't rung in months. Only 2 people had the number, Lena Holloway and a woman he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. When it rang that morning, slicing through the fog with a sound so foreign it startled the gulls, Wren froze. He stared at it, then picked up. Wren? The voice was unmistakable, calm, clear, but hiding tension under each syllable. Lena, he said, rough, with disuse. It's been a while. Dr. Lena Holloway was one of the few people Wren had ever trusted, a forensic anthropologist with a reputation for brilliance and a look in her eyes that said she'd seen too much and filed it all away in neat little boxes just to keep functioning. They'd worked side by side on more cases than he could count. There'd been something between them once, maybe just a connection between wounded minds, or maybe something more, but neither had dared name it. I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't serious, she said, without preamble. Wren didn't respond. He didn't need to. She continued. This morning, a package arrived at my lab. No return address, just a box, sealed tight. He could already feel where this was going. I opened it. Inside were human remains, bone fragments, some tissue, preserved. She took a breath. There was a note, just a name. Wren closed his eyes. Laura Morley. Silence pulsed between them like a heartbeat. I thought you should know, Lena said quietly. This isn't random. Someone's trying to rattle the cage. Wren stared out the window. The ocean thrashed violently now, like it too was disturbed. His voice was low. Are you sure it's not a hoax? I ran preliminary tests. The tissue's real, so's the bone. And the handwriting on the note, I've seen it before, years ago, on another case, one of yours. The phone was warm against his ear. His fingers felt cold. "Wren," she said gently, "I don't think you're done." He didn't answer, couldn't. Something had begun to stir in his chest, not just dread, but something sharper, deeper. Purpose, the thing that had once defined him. He hung up without saying goodbye. The Bloodhound had been asleep, but now the scent had returned. The rain had stopped just before sunset, leaving the city's cobblestones glistening like polished obsidian under the amber glow of the street lamps. Down a quiet, ivy-veined alley, tucked behind a weathered wrought-iron gate and a set of mirrored doors, sat Velvet and Smoke, an art gallery known only to those who needed to know it. Tonight, the gallery thrummed with tension, desire, and quiet suspicion. Evelyn Rausch, the enigmatic proprietor, stood at the center of it all. She was dressed in obsidian silk and garnet earrings that glimmered like blood beneath the light. Though the patrons spoke in murmurs and laughter, eyes always found Evelyn. To the art world, she was a tastemaker. To the underworld, she was something far more valuable, a broker of rare objects and rarer information. They called her the Velvet Broker, and her gallery was both showroom and trap. The night's event was an exclusive exhibition of obscurities, forgotten surrealist masters, lost Renaissance sketches, and a rumored war-era sculpture that had supposedly vanished from the Louvre during the Great Blackout of 1943. Guests sipped pale champagne and made offers in the currency of secrets. Evelyn observed them all with the cool detachment of a queen watching pawns circle a throne. But one guest caught her attention like a spark in the dark. He arrived late, his coat too heavy for the weather, his gaze too restless. Marcellus Mars Grady, a known fence with a taste for relics and a nervous tick in his left thumb. He circled the gallery, not with awe, but with intent, eyes skipping the art and landing instead on camera mounts, exit doors, and glass cases. His movements were sharp, mechanical, barely masking the anxiety bubbling beneath his skin. Evelyn watched him for nearly 20 minutes, pretending not to. She noticed how his breathing shallowed near the Etruscan reliquary, how his eyes lingered on a painting rumored to conceal a coded ledger. Then, as he paused near the weeping bronze mask at the center of the room, she approached. "Mars," she said quietly, her voice smooth as ink. "You look like a man trying to memorize the shape of every lock in the building." He stiffened. "Evelyn, it's been a while." "Not long enough if you're already casing my floor like it's a museum after hours." Mars gave a thin, practiced smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just appreciating the collection. Some pieces stir memories." "Or whispers," she said, letting her voice dip. "People are saying you're looking for something, or someone." A pause. Mars swallowed. "I've heard a rumor." She arched her brow. "Don't we all?" His voice dropped. "An artifact, pre-civil, carved bone reliquary. Something to do with the Holloway estate, maybe even older. They say it's resurfaced." Evelyn's blood ran colder than she let on. That name, Holloway, had appeared too often lately. First in forensic whispers, then in the phone call Thomas Wren received, and now
Here. You're late, she said, folding her arms. It's already moving. Then tell me where. Evelyn leaned in, her perfume subtle, cigars and velvet and faded jasmine. You're not the only one asking, Mars, and the people who are play for higher stakes than you do. He hesitated. There's money. There's always money, but not always blood or silence. They stood there a moment longer, staring, the gallery's golden light painting shadows across their faces. Around them, the crowd murmured, oblivious to the gravity pressing between two old ghosts. Eventually, Evelyn moved away, blending into the crowd like smoke returning to air. The event began to thin, the social elite drifting out into the damp streets with wine-soaked grins and whispered bids. Evelyn retreated to her private lounge above the gallery, a small room filled with old books, Persian rugs, and a low-burning fireplace. She poured herself a glass of dry sherry and sank into the leather armchair, finally letting her mind untangle the knots Mars had pulled tight. Her phone buzzed. No name, no preview, just a message. Delivery confirmed. Dravatskaya's house, Elm Street, tonight. Evelyn stared at the words. Her pulse quickened. Marietta Dravatskaya. It had been years since that name crossed her path. The woman was a recluse now, after the incident on the Blackstone estate. Rumors swirled that she had once been involved in private acquisitions, possibly the same relic Mars was chasing. Evelyn had thought Marietta long retired or buried. But now she was back, and so was the artifact. She rose, walking to the tall windows that overlooked the gallery below. From here she could see the ghost of Mars disappearing down the alley, swallowed by the night. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled again, not from the clouds, but from under the city, where old stories stirred. This wasn't about money. This was about something older, deeper, something that was never meant to return. Evelyn finished her sherry in one swallow. She crossed the room, opened the drawer of her writing desk, and retrieved a small, velvet-lined box. Inside lay a strange, curved key, carved from bone and stained with time. It had been gifted to her years ago in a sealed envelope with no return address. She'd always suspected it wasn't just a key, but a map. Now it was time to find the door it opened.
The cold hum of fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above the sterile laboratory at the University of London's Forensic Anthropology Department. Steel tables gleamed under the white glow, each one a silent stage for the dead to whisper their last truths. Among the hum of machines and the faint scratch of pens against observation charts, Dr. Lena Holloway stood motionless, her gloved fingers poised above the human mandible laid out before her like a sacred artifact. Lena was no stranger to death. She had spent years reading bones the way others read tea leaves, decoding fractures, growth patterns, and microscopic wear for clues about the lives once lived. But today, her breath sat heavy in her chest. Her dark eyes, typically sharp and clinical, now flickered with something closer to dread. The remains before her had arrived in an unmarked parcel, with no note, no context, just a human jawbone and a single femur wrapped in linen as if someone had plucked them carefully from a crypt. Whoever sent them knew exactly what they were doing. It was the dental work that struck her first. 2 gold molars and a hairline ceramic crown on the left incisor. The work was rare, distinctive, and hauntingly familiar. Her mind reeled back a decade to a time when she was still a student in Oxford, to a bright-eyed classmate named Alice Durant, who had gone missing one rainy October night and was never found. Alice had always been a mystery, brilliant, reckless, always scribbling notes about ancient burial rites and vanishing cults. Her energy had been magnetic and troubling. Lena remembered the last thing Alice ever said to her. "If I disappear, don't assume I'm dead. Assume the story just got interesting." She stared down at the jawbone again. "You arrogant, clever ghost," she whispered. A knock broke the silence. She looked up, startled, as the heavy lab door creaked open. A tall figure stood framed in the doorway, his silhouette angular against the soft hallway light. Thomas Wren. Even after years of absence, he carried himself like a man still haunted by the scent of blood and cigarette smoke. The once acclaimed detective, nicknamed the Bloodhound by the press, had vanished from public life after the Crowhurst case, a child abduction gone cold under his watch. He wore a dark wool coat, damp with drizzle, and eyes that had seen too many things people shouldn't. "You called," he said simply. "I did," she replied, stepping back from the table to let him see the remains. Wren's gaze dropped to the jawbone, and his brows furrowed. "Where did you get this?" "It arrived 2 nights ago. No return address, just the bones and a single phrase scrawled on the inside of the package. Ask Wren what he forgot." A silence bloomed between them like frost. He moved closer, inspecting the teeth. His hand hovered, as if afraid the bones might recoil. "These match Alice Durant?" "Dental records. I confirmed it twice." Wren exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the chill of the lab. "I worked a disappearance years ago. Girl vanished after researching pre-Christian burial sites in northern England. Alice Durant was on a list of academic correspondence. But there was no body, no evidence of foul play. It just went dark." "And now," she said softly, "someone wants you to know she was never far." He nodded slowly, jaw tightening. "I thought I left all this behind," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "But it hasn't left you," she replied, "and you know it." He turned to her. "Why now? Why you?" "I don't know, but I can't ignore this, and I know you can't either." She reached beneath the table and pulled out a slim folder. Inside were photocopies of Alice's student writings, notes Lena had saved for sentimental reasons after Alice vanished. Most were benign, passages on Neolithic burial positions, preservation techniques, and the folklore of bone readers. But one in particular stood out, a torn journal page that read, "Bones speak, but only to those who know how to ask. They remember what the living try to forget." Thomas read it in silence. "I think she knew she was being watched," Lena continued. "These aren't just random remains. This is a message." He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Do you have any leads?" "One. The linen used to wrap the bones. It's old, handmade, possibly Eastern European. The weave matches textiles from a private collection that belonged to Marietta Drovskaya." "That name again. You've heard it?" He nodded grimly. "Someone mentioned a delivery to her old house, Elm Street. The same day the package arrived here, I got a call, anonymous, saying I should look where the story began." Lena's heart skipped. "Do you think Alice ever went there?" "I think she never left." They stood in the silence of the lab, surrounded by the quiet murmur of machines and the lingering weight of memory. For Wren, the past was not a closed case, but an open wound. And now, as the evidence bled back into his world,
He realized he could no longer pretend to be a man in retirement. The bones had called him back, and he had no choice but to answer. Lena watched him as he slipped the folder into his coat and turned toward the door. "Are you going?" she asked. "To Elm Street." She stepped forward. "I'm coming with you." Wren hesitated, but didn't argue. Some paths were too dark to walk alone. As they left the lab, a distant rumble of thunder rolled across the London sky. Outside, the rain began to fall in thin, silvery strands, like threads being pulled loose from a story neither of them had finished reading.
The rain in the city had taken on that oily sheen that always made Thomas Wren uneasy. A mixture of motor exhausts, cigarette ash, and quiet sins ran down the gutters and rivulets, feeding into the damp belly of London's older quarters. Wren pulled the brim of his hat low and adjusted the collar of his coat, his boots splashing through puddles slick with reflected neon. He hadn't walked these streets in years, yet they felt unchanged, dank, narrow, and humming with secrets. He stopped outside a weathered pub on the corner of Crane and Wellington, a place so deeply forgotten that it seemed immune to time. The sign above the door had lost most of its lettering, now reading simply, "The blank Arms." Inside, light leaked through cracked stained glass windows, casting fractured colors onto the wet pavement. He pushed open the door. The scent hit him immediately. Beer, mildew, and a touch of stale regret. The air was thick, the kind that clung to you and followed you home. A few patrons loitered at the bar, hunched like gargoyles over their drinks, avoiding eye contact. In a shadowed booth near the back, a thin man with wiry hair and nervous eyes twitched at every sound. Marcellus Grady, Mars to those who knew his name at all. Wren approached slowly, the creak of the wooden floorboards announcing his arrival. Mars looked up, visibly flinching. His left eye twitched. "Wren, you really came." "I'm not here for a reunion," Wren said flatly, slipping into the booth opposite him. "It's urgent," he said. Mars nodded quickly, licking his lips. His fingers drummed against the condensation on his pint glass. "Things are off. There's movement, the kind of chatter you don't ignore. People are scared." Wren said nothing, just watched. Mars was unraveling, and he knew enough to let him do it on his own terms. "There was a deal. A private buyer. Something to do with artifacts. Rare stuff, not just your standard looted junk. This was curated, special. Cult things. Bone relics, pagan pieces, whispered names from old faiths. I don't even think they were from one culture. It was a patchwork of nightmares." "And?" Mars leaned in, lowering his voice. "They switched the package. The buyer vanished. A courier ended up dead in an alley near Shoreditch, missing his tongue. I saw it, Wren. I saw it." Wren narrowed his eyes. "And where does Evelyn Rausch fit into this?" Mars flinched at the name like it had teeth. "She was at the gallery when the deal was first floated. The Velvet Broker, they called her. Always 2 steps ahead, always smiling like she knew how it ended." "Was she involved directly?" "No one knows. She never touches the goods, just facilitates, whispers, watches. She talks to people like they're already on her chessboard." Wren leaned back. The Velvet Broker. He had heard the name in whispers for years, but never attached to a face. Now it seemed Evelyn Rausch was more than an eccentric gallerist. She was a gatekeeper to something much older and much more dangerous. Mars's leg bounced under the table, his eyes darting to the exit and back. "I shouldn't be talking to you. They'll know." "Who?" Mars didn't answer. He pulled out a crumpled scrap of paper and slid it across the table. Rana unfolded it carefully. A name.
a location, and a symbol, a rough circle with a downward-pointing triangle inside, etched in shaking lines. She gave that to someone before the switch. Said it was a key. What is it? Mars looked up, his gaze wide and haunted. It's a map, maybe, or a ritual. I don't know, but people have died for less. Wren stared at the paper, then at Mars, whose hands were now trembling so violently he had to grip the edge of the table to still them. You're hiding something, he said softly. Mars blinked rapidly. I told you everything. No, Wren interrupted, his voice sharp. You told me what someone told you to say, but your hands say you're terrified, and not just of me. What are you not telling me, Mars? He hesitated. His mouth opened, then shut. Wren reached into his coat and laid something gently on the table. A single brass button, old and scuffed, the kind worn on ceremonial coats decades ago. Mars stared at it like it might explode. You gave this to Alice Durant once. Told her it belonged to a dead cult. She trusted you. And she disappeared. Mars's eyes widened. He looked around the bar again, shrinking into his coat. I didn't mean to... To what? Wren asked. To get her killed? Or to bury the truth? I didn't know what she was chasing. I thought it was just stories, old bones, crazy folk tales. I didn't think they were real. Wren stood slowly. They were real enough for someone to silence her. And now they've sent her bones back to the surface. Mars looked like a man falling off a building in slow motion. You shouldn't be asking these questions. They'll come for you too. Let them, Wren said. As he walked outside, Wren tucked the crumpled paper into his coat. Outside, the city's rain had grown colder, harsher. The shadows seemed to press closer. He could feel the noose tightening, not just around Mars, but on something larger, older, crawling its way back into the present through secrets and symbols. Wren had once promised himself he was done chasing ghosts. But now, the ghosts were chasing him.
The house at 17 Elm Street loomed like a forgotten stanza of a half-remembered poem, one that lingered just on the edge of sense. Tall and narrow, with gables that bent like hunched shoulders and windows clouded by decades of dust, it looked less like a residence and more like an exhausted relic clinging to its last breath. The gate creaked open on rusted hinges as Thomas Wren pushed it aside, its shriek breaking the unnatural silence that had settled over the street like a shroud. Dr. Lena Holloway stood at his side, her coat buttoned high, her expression unreadable but tense. Her eyes never stopped moving, scanning the house, the hedges, the porch, as though bracing for something to stir in the shadows. This place feels wrong, she murmured. Wren nodded once. Good. That means we're in the right place. Inside, the house exhaled centuries of stillness as the door opened with a reluctant groan. Dust boats danced in the shafts of late afternoon light piercing through the tattered curtains. The scent was immediate, thick and choking, a blend of paper decay, iron-rich air, and something cloyingly floral like withered lilies. The air felt heavy with a pressure that didn't belong to the weather. But it was the clocks that truly disturbed them. Everywhere on shelves, on mantels, nailed into crooked walls, clocks ticked, not in unison. Each one kept its own pace, some fast, some slow, some whispering with faint, almost inaudible clicks. It was as though time itself had fractured here, losing its rhythm and meaning. Wren felt his stomach twist as he passed a grandfather clock whose hands turned backwards. She collected them, Lena whispered, voice nearly swallowed by the layers of silence. "Marietta always loved broken things. She said they had stories trapped inside them." "You knew her," Wren said, more observation than question. Lena did not respond. They moved cautiously through the foyer and into the sitting room. Faded wallpaper peeled like curled skin from the walls. The fireplace was stacked with books instead of logs, volumes warped with moisture, their spines etched with obscure symbols and titles in forgotten tongues. On a low table, a ceramic dish still held the brittle remains of something that had once been fruit. Then Wren saw the mirror. It stood against the far wall, tall and ornately framed, its surface swathed in a pale linen cloth secured with string. A faint glimmer pulsed beneath the fabric, as if the mirror breathed with its own rhythm. Wren approached and gently pulled the cloth free. The surface of the mirror was wrong. It did not reflect the room as it was. It reflected it darker, warped, as though bathed in perpetual dusk. The mirror Lena and mirror Wren stood in the same positions, but their movements lagged by seconds. The room behind them in the glass was subtly different, shadows deeper, walls crawling with thin tendrils of smoke that writhed and withdrew as he stared. "The window to elsewhere," Lena said quietly, her voice hollow. "You've seen this before." "Only once, back at university. Marietta showed it to me during our 3rd year, said it had come through a collection in Prague, unverified, undocumented. She called it a passage, not a mirror. I thought she was romanticizing, obsessed. She always chased the edge of belief." Wren turned to her. "You didn't report it?" "She disappeared a week later. I thought maybe she'd gone underground, gone mad." Wren's eyes returned to the mirror. His reflection was staring back at him, but there was no Lena in the glass. Then Lena gasped. He turned to see her holding a folded piece of yellowed paper she'd pulled from behind a clock's wooden casing. Her hands trembled. "It's her handwriting. It's a note." Wren took it gently. The ink had bled in some places, but the message was legible. "If you found this, I've gone through. I didn't mean to. The mirror calls, wants something. I saw someone in the glass. It wore my face, but its smile didn't reach its eyes. Don't trust it. Don't speak to it. If you try to follow, remember the name Falvarin. It sees. It listens. It lies. M.D. Wren read the note twice, then a 3rd time. "She went through," he muttered. Lena turned away from the mirror and paced toward the fireplace. Her composure had cracked. There was a tremor in her breath. She used to dream about places beyond, not heavens, not hells, just elsewhere. She believed there were places stitched between realities, little gaps in the seams of the world. This house, it was her final stitch. Wren folded the note and placed it into his coat pocket. The air around the mirror had turned colder, charged with the buzz of static. "I don't think we're alone in here," he said softly. A sharp tick-tick-tick erupted from the grandfather clock in the hallway. Then, at once, every clock in the house began to chime, not in harmony, but in discordant madness, each striking a different hour. The sound surged like a wave of metal and memory, rattling windows and sending tremors through the floorboards. Lena clutched her ears. "It's trying to wake something." And then, silence. As abruptly as the cacophony had started, it stopped. The air felt vacuumed, thin and dead. The mirror's surface shimmered once more. A handprint, smeared in faint gray, appeared on the inside of the glass. Wren stepped forward instinctively, but Lena gripped his arm. "We leave," she said firmly. "Now."
They exited without speaking, the door slamming shut behind them with the finality of a tomb ceiling. Outside, the world felt too bright, the air too clean, but both of them knew the house had not relinquished its hold. As they reached the gate, Wren turned for one last glance. From an upstairs window, a figure watched them. It wore Marietta's face, but it did not blink.
Marcellus Grady was not a man easily rattled. A survivor of more back-alley deals and narrow escapes than even he could count, Mars had always danced at the edge of legality with a grin, a joke, and a pistol tucked under his coat. But tonight, that same grin wavered, slipping from his face like a mask soaked in sweat. He lit a cigarette with trembling fingers and handed Wren a burner phone. "Don't use your own. You call the number I give you from this, once, then ditch it." Thomas Wren tucked the phone into his coat pocket without a word. They stood in the narrow alley behind the shuttered remains of what used to be a watchmaker's shop in Southwark. A cold drizzle dripped from the eaves, silvering Mars's worn leather jacket and soaking the brim of Wren's hat. Somewhere nearby, a busker played a minor key tune on a saxophone, haunting the air with melancholy. "I'm trusting you," Mars muttered, casting a glance over his shoulder. "I shouldn't, I know that, but I owe you, and I'm out of places to hide." "What changed?" Wren asked. Mars took a deep drag, exhaling smoke like a dragon grown tired of guarding its hoard. "I got squeezed twice this week. First by some private muscle. I think they were freelance, maybe ex-Interpol, judging by their boots. And then by the Vervain Syndicate. Haven't heard that name in a while, huh?" Wren frowned. The Vervain Syndicate was dissolved 3 years ago, after Berlin. Not dissolved, just changed flags. Mars flicked ash onto the wet cobblestone. They're into art now, smuggling, antiquities, relics, and someone's been moving pieces through Evelyn Rausch's gallery. Big ticket items, stuff that should have been under glass in national museums. "Evelyn's connected?" Wren's tone hardened. "More than connected," Mars said grimly. "She's curating it. Her gallery's a front. Only certain buyers get the real invitation. They call it the Gilded Room. That's where the trades happened. Quiet, discreet, encrypted." "And you've been helping them?" Mars turned, fire in his eyes. "Not by choice. I moved one item, just one, a Byzantine reliquary. I thought it was a scam, a fake. But the buyer? He wasn't normal, Wren. He asked questions in Latin. His eyes didn't blink. When I tried to pull out, they sent Luca." Wren's breath caught at the name. "Luca de Brienne?" Mars nodded. "He's not just fencing goods anymore. He's managing threats." Luca de Brienne was a name that carried whispers even in the darkest parts of London's underworld. A former art restorer turned enforcer, he had a reputation for turning people into exhibits, often permanently. If Mars had crossed paths with Luca, then this was no longer just an investigation. It was a countdown. "So," Mars continued, lowering his voice, "you want names? Fine. I've got 3. Ones I trust less than a broken fire escape. But they'll talk, under pressure." They made their way through winding alleyways, through rusted fire doors and graffiti-tagged stairwells, descending into the underbelly of the city. Mars's contacts operated like rats, never in the same place twice, always watching for traps. The first was a calligrapher named Ghazi, who specialized in forging provenance documents. He worked from a lockup under an abandoned metro tunnel, painting lies with gold ink. "He processed the Rausch pieces," Mars whispered as they approached. "He's terrified but greedy." Wren questioned him under flickering fluorescent lights, his voice calm but unrelenting. Ghazi eventually cracked. revealing shipping manifests encrypted with a numeric cipher tied to Renaissance calendar dates. The shipments originated not in Europe, but in Newfoundland, rerouted through decoy brokers. The second courier, Jin, a woman with tattoos inked across her knuckles like protection charms. She drove a refrigerated van and claimed she was just the driver, but Wren recognized a professional when he saw one. She confirmed the transfers and even shared partial footage from a dash cam, blurry night shots of Evelyn Rausch stepping out of a black sedan, followed by a man with a cane carved like a serpent. The third contact was the most dangerous, an anonymous fixer known as Lockjaw, who operated out of a floating card room hidden behind a faux speakeasy on the Thames. "I'm not going in there," Mars said flatly, as they stood outside the speakeasy's discreet door, marked only by a brass bell and a mural of a blindfolded lion. "You brought me this far," Wren replied. "I won't ask you to follow." But Mars hesitated. Then, with a groan, he followed anyway. The inside was lush and dim, velvet booths, hazy cigar smoke, and jazz that slithered rather than swung. Lockjaw was seated at the far table, dressed in a plum-colored suit with ivory buttons. His mouth was a ruin of old knife wounds, sealed partially with surgical tape. But his eyes, sharp and unblinking, betrayed nothing but calculation. Wren laid out his cards quickly, metaphorically and literally. He told Lockjaw what he needed, the link between the Gilded Room and Evelyn Rausch, who the buyers were, who was laundering the money, who Luca was protecting. Lockjaw tilted his head as if listening to a sound only he could hear. "You're poking a nest, and this one has fangs. You want Evelyn? Fine, but you'll need to bleed for it, or Mars will." He leaned forward and whispered something in Mars's ear. Mars Gale pale. "What did he say?" Wren demanded as they stepped outside. Mars shook his head. "He knows I moved more than one item. He knows about Prague. If this leaks, I'm dead. I mean done. Evelyn doesn't let loose ends tangle." "You're a loose end now," Wren said, "unless we cut the whole rope." They stood in silence, the city buzzing faintly around them like a dying circuit. Finally, Mars exhaled. "All right, canary sung. Now what?" Wren looked east, toward the shimmering horizon of the Thames, where the lights of Evelyn's gallery cast distorted reflections across the water. "Now, we burn the Gilded Room down." The house at 17 Elm Street had not grown less ominous since their last visit. Dust still clung to the wood-paneled walls like mildew from forgotten time, and the air carried that same strange density, as if something unseen had exhaled and hadn't inhaled again. Outside, the sun hung low and orange through the thick trees, its light barely penetrating the thick curtains drawn across the windows. Dr. Lena Holloway tightened the belt of her coat as she followed Thomas Wren inside. She hadn't said much during the drive, but her eyes remained fixed ahead, on the second floor where the bedroom mirror waited. It was the mirror that had drawn them back, not just any antique, but the window to elsewhere, as it was once called. The phrase came from one of Marita Dravosky's notes, a scrap scribbled hastily the night she vanished. The stairs groaned under their weight as they climbed. The bedroom was exactly as they'd left it, cold, heavy with silence, and tinged with the faintest smell of lavender and old metal. The mirror dominated the wall opposite the bed, ornate, framed in dark oak vines, the glass impossibly clean despite the rest of the room's decay. "Same as before?" Wren asked. "No," Lena whispered. "Worse." She stepped forward slowly. The mirror greeted her not with her own reflection, but with a different room entirely. Wren watched from the doorframe, his brow furrowed. "What do you see?" Lena swallowed hard. "It's Marita." She's standing just there, she pointed to the foot of the bed, but younger. Her hair's down and she's wearing that old blue coat she used to wear at university. God, I haven't thought about that in years. Anyone else? Wren asked. Lena hesitated. There's a man beside her, but I can't. His face won't hold still. It's like it's glitching. I can see the outline of him, but the details slip away. Wren stepped closer, staring into the glass. To him, the room and the reflection looked the same, almost, but it wasn't quite this bedroom. The angle of the fireplace was wrong. A picture frame appeared on the mantel in the reflection, but in the actual room, no such photograph existed. Even the color of the drapes was subtly different. It's a different version of this room, not past or present, parallel, Wren murmured. Lena nodded slowly, as if understanding was just beginning to root itself in her mind. The mirror isn't just showing us memories, it's showing what could have happened, or what did happen in another place. Wren reached into his coat and withdrew a flashlight. He examined the frame of the mirror closely, tapping along the edges. This doesn't belong in a private home. This is...
By the time the last light fades behind the rooftops of old Eltville, Thomas Wren is already watching the gallery from across the street. The Rausch galleries stood like a cathedral to curated secrets, tall, angular, and unnervingly silent. Its windows shimmered with faint interior light, obscured by silk drapes and the hazy distortion of antique glass. It was the kind of place that didn't just display art, it curated alibis, legacies, and lies. Thomas adjusted the cuff of his borrowed suit. Every detail had to be perfect. The silver cufflinks, the watch he hadn't worn in years, the accent he'd practiced earlier that morning, just enough East Coast polish to suggest old money, but vague enough to avoid scrutiny. He stepped through the wrought iron gate, the hinges whispering in protest, and entered the gallery. Inside, warm lamplight cast golden shadows over the walls, illuminating oil portraits, sculpted forms, and gilded frames that seemed older than the city itself. The floor was muffled with imported rugs, and a faint scent of sandalwood clung to the air, as if trying to mask something older, more human, old dust, old paint, or perhaps old guilt. A woman emerged from the far side of the gallery, tall, poised, every step of hers a whisper. Evelyn Rausch looked like a woman who had walked through centuries untouched. She wore a long ash-gray dress and a smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Wren, was it?" she said, extending her hand. "Yes, Thomas Wren. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," he replied, clasping her hand firmly. Her grip was light but practiced, the kind of handshake that tells you nothing. "I understand you're interested in rare antiquities," she said, gliding toward the exhibit room. "We've just acquired something rather special." Her voice was calm, melodic, yet behind it lurked something serpentine, a sense that each word had been weighed, measured, and rehearsed. As she spoke, Thomas scanned the room. Cameras in the corners, none obvious. A man in a tailored suit stood at the edge of a corridor. Security, no doubt, but nothing overt, nothing that screamed illicit. Evelyn led him to a display case at the far end of the gallery. Beneath a pane of crystal glass sat a peculiar artifact, a silver idol worn by time but eerily preserved. Its form resembled a bird, but with human-like eyes set deep into the polished metal. He'd seen a sketch of something like this in Mars Notes. "This came to us through a very private channel," Evelyn said, watching him.
The provenance is complicated. Thomas leaned closer. Complicated how? A family estate, disputed ownership, a missing collector, she said, with a small, elegant shrug. But as with all things in this business, stories make the piece. He nodded slowly, though his thoughts were racing. Mars had warned him about a shipment that had gone awry. This had to be part of it. But Evelyn was too composed, too polished. Either she didn't know how deep it went, or she knew exactly and was playing her part with perfection. "And if I were interested in acquiring it?" he asked casually. Her smile deepened, but it still didn't touch her eyes. "Then we would speak more privately, perhaps another evening." Thomas felt the subtle push in her tone, a test, a challenge. He needed to back off before she grew suspicious, so he smiled, thanked her for the preview, and made his way toward the entrance. The night air would clear his head. But as he turned the final corner toward the main hall, something caught his eye. A flicker of movement near the rear corridor, a shadow passing near the private entrance. He slowed. A figure slipped inside. He stopped cold. It was Lena. Wearing a charcoal coat and her hair pinned up, she moved with purpose, not hesitation. She didn't look like someone who had wandered in. She looked like someone who belonged. A jolt ran through him, not of anger, but something heavier. Doubt, frustration, betrayal. What the hell was she doing here? He stepped back, disappearing into a nearby alcove as she vanished into a side hallway. Heart pounding, he waited until the faint click of a closing door echoed down the corridor. Then he moved, slipping out the front with the same careful poise he'd arrived with. Outside, the cold air hit like a slap. Somewhere behind him, the gallery stood in its glowing silence, but everything inside had changed. Thomas walked, thoughts unraveling faster than his footsteps. Evelyn's careful words, the artifact, Lena's unexpected presence. None of it made sense yet, but the edges were beginning to align. There was a network here, a web hidden beneath the elegance and silence, and now he knew Lena was somewhere inside it. And the deeper he went, the more he realized the art wasn't the only thing being curated in this city.
The invitation arrived not by courier or post, but slipped under the door of Thomas Wren's apartment in a sleek black envelope. The paper was thick, textured like old vellum, embossed with the faint outline of an owl clutching a velvet thread. No name, no date, just coordinates, a time, and a single sentence. You are cordially invited to witness the unveiling of memory. Wren studied the card for a long time before he tucked it into his coat. The game had shifted. The auction was held at the edge of the city, in a derelict opera house long since condemned by public record, but clearly kept alive in the shadows. Lanterns flickered behind frosted windows, and masked attendants greeted guests in hushed tones, their hands gloved in white velvet. A string quartet played something haunting in a minor key, their music curling around the columns like smoke. Wren entered under the guise of Mr. Thorne, a fictitious art collector from Vienna with a taste for the surreal. His mask, silver, featureless save for an etched Ouroboros, covered enough of his face to keep suspicions at bay. Even so, he moved with calculated ease, scanning the room for exits, surveillance, and familiar faces. Evelyn Rausch stood beneath the great chandelier like a sovereign in exile. Draped in black velvet, her hair pinned with amber combs, she greeted her guests like old friends and future enemies. When her gaze fell on Wren, her lips curved in a smile too precise to be welcoming. "Mr. Thorne," she said, gliding over, "how generous of you to come." Her voice, as always, was rich with implication. "I wouldn't miss an unveiling," he replied. She reached out and adjusted the collar of his coat. "I believe you'll find tonight's offering quite personal." The auction began in the crumbling amphitheater, where marble balconies loomed above the velvet-covered dais. Items were paraded in by silent attendants: a bronze funerary mask from Carthage, a knife rumored to have belonged to a Russian mystic, a mirror shard labeled simply Tang Dynasty, Echo. As the bidding wars commenced, Wren slipped away through a narrow service door he'd clocked earlier. He moved down a dim corridor, the walls lined with peeling posters from forgotten performances. At the far end, past an old cloakroom, he found what he was looking for: an unmarked door with a biometric lock already disarmed. It opened at his touch. Inside was a small chamber, cold and windowless, its walls lined with storage crates and covered easels. The air smelled of old wood and something older still, dust maybe, or time. A low red light illuminated the room, casting elongated shadows across the floor. On a central table sat an array of personal effects: a porcelain comb, a half-burned journal, a rusted pendant with a turquoise stone. Wren's breath caught. These weren't ordinary artifacts, they belonged to Marietta. He recognized the journal immediately. He had seen her writing in it the night before she vanished. With gloved hands, he opened the cover. Her handwriting stared back at him, elegant, looping, urgent. "If something happens to me, it won't be by chance. The mirror knows, and she, Evelyn, knows more than she pretends. If I disappear, follow the reflection." He barely had time to register the final sentence before he heard the soft click of a heel behind him. "You really should be more careful where you wander," Evelyn said, stepping into the room. She no longer smiled. Wren turned, tucking the journal inside his coat. "Curiosity, Evelyn. You built this house of secrets. Did you expect no one to peek behind the curtain?" She laughed, but it was humorless. "Oh, I expected it. In fact, I invited it." She walked toward him slowly, her hands clasped behind her back. "You came here thinking you were hunting truth. But you're just another relic, Thomas. One more echo of a pattern too old to rewrite." "Where is she?" he asked. "What happened to Marietta?" Evelyn tilted her head. "She reached too far, touched something ancient, and when she saw it, she tried to warn you." Wren's eyes narrowed. "The mirror." She looked through it, yes, but more importantly, it looked back, and something saw her. He took a step toward her. "What is this really about? Smuggling? Power? Obsession?" She shook her head, amused. "It's about resonance, Thomas. Memory stored in objects, in glass and stone and pigment. That mirror wasn't just a window, it was a vessel. And now it's calling, to those who've seen its reflection." A quiet sound behind him, a door sliding shut. Wren spun, but the exit had vanished, replaced with seamless wall. "She knows who you are now," Evelyn whispered. "He knows." "Who?" Wren demanded. But Evelyn only turned and walked back into the darkness beyond the frame of the door. Before she disappeared, she said a final word: "Velvet." The light in the room flickered, then dimmed to near black. The pendant on the table vibrated gently, then began to glow. Wren stepped back, heart racing. The red light pulsed in time with the sound now rising in the chamber, a low hum, like a tuning fork struck in a cathedral. The shadows on the wall no longer matched the shape of the objects casting them. He reached for the journal again, but it was gone. In its place was a new note, freshly written. Welcome to the trap. The walls groaned, and somewhere beneath his feet, a mechanism clicked. Wren's mask, heavy on his face, suddenly felt too tight. The door had sealed, the auction above was long gone, and Evelyn Rausch, whether ally or architect, had delivered him into the hands of someone else entirely. The velvet broker had stepped onto the stage, and Wren, for the first time, was no longer sure if he was the hunter or the artifact. The walls of the basement weren't stone, Wren had learned that much by now. They were something else, smooth like plaster, but warm to the touch, as though the building itself were alive and breathing just below the surface. He paced the perimeter again, counting each step like a litany, his boots echoing in the strange silence. Above him, Evelyn Rausch's trap held firm. The room was sealed, without window or latch, and the lights had long since dimmed to a dusky amber. It cast long shadows that didn't always behave. Sometimes, if he stared too long, they moved, jerking slightly, like a figure caught in the edge of a dream. Then a hiss, a sound of shifting metal, and the door, previously seamless, parted with a mechanical sigh. Wren turned swiftly, eyes narrowing. Dr. Lena Holloway stepped through. She looked almost spectral under the pale amber light, hair loosened, coat stained from the damp passage above, her boots leaving faint prints on the cold floor. But her expression was calm, calculated, and Wren recognized that familiar look of war between intellect and instinct playing out behind her eyes. "Here to rescue me?" he asked, voice flat. "Something like that," she replied, her gaze scanning the room. "You were with Evelyn. Last I saw you, you were slipping into the gallery like you belonged there." "I did once, before any of this." Before he could respond, the door behind her closed. Lena didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her presence both a comfort and a warning. "She's not entirely wrong, you know, about memory, about what the artifact might be. You came all this way to philosophize? I came because Evelyn asked me to, but I stayed because I needed to see you." Wren's jaw tensed. "So you're working with her?" "No, I'm trying to stop her. But I can't do that if you don't trust me." Wren turned from her, running a hand down the edge of a crate in the corner. Dusty, scratched, possibly from struggling captives or careless handling. It didn't matter. "What does she want?" he asked at last. "She wants the mirror whole. She thinks it will reveal everything, Marietta's final location, the hidden temple, and even the names of those who buried the truth. But Evelyn doesn't care about preservation. She wants access, power." "And you?" Wren asked, facing her again. "What do you want?" Lena didn't answer at first. Then she said, "I want Marietta back. I want to stop looking over my shoulder, and I want to forget what we saw that night in the archives." Before Wren could respond, a dull clang echoed above. The lights flickered. A new shape dropped through a hidden grate in the ceiling.
The basement door hissed open with a hiss that sounded too much like a breath. Wren barely had time to react before blinding white light spilled into the chamber, slicing through the amber gloom like a scalpel. Evelyn Rausch stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed in brilliance, every inch of her posture composed, almost regal, if royalty trafficked in secrets and shadows. Behind her, two silent guards with glassy eyes and matching pistols remained in the hallway like stone sentinels. She stepped inside alone. "Thomas," she said, her voice syrupy with venom, How poetic to find the great bloodhound in a cage. Wren didn't move. His back was straight, but his exhaustion pooled beneath his eyes, and his hands, though clenched, trembled slightly. Beside him, Mars and Lena stood shoulder to shoulder, uncertain allies stitched together by desperation. "You've gone to a lot of trouble," Wren muttered, "for a conversation." "Oh, Thomas," Evelyn's heels clicked across the concrete. "This isn't just a conversation. This is the conversation, the one you've been sniffing at for years." Her eyes locked with his, unblinking. "I suppose it's time you knew the truth about Marietta's disappearance. And the children." The air left the room like a sucked-out flame. Even Mars flinched. Wren's voice was flat. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" she said softly, reaching into her coat pocket. She pulled out a folded, yellowing file and dropped it at his feet. Wren stared at it. He knew that paper, knew the grain, knew the seal. His case file, from the Windsor Street disappearances. That was the case that had broken him. 7 missing children, no ransom, no bodies, just whispers and shadows, and one last phone call that played on loop in his head whenever he tried to sleep. He knelt slowly, hand hovering over the folder like it might burn him. "Open it," Evelyn said. "You've earned that much." He did. The first page was a photograph, black and white, grainy, a girl with large eyes and a ribbon in her hair. Anna Greaves, age 6, vanished from a church fair in daylight. The image was stamped with new annotations in red ink, but the worst part, what twisted his gut, was the signature on the margin. E.R. Evelyn Rausch. "You filed this?" he asked, voice shaking. "You archived them?" "I collected them," she said, as if she were discussing antique jewelry. "For preservation, study. The world buries the unusual. I merely disinter it." Wren's knuckles whitened. "You're admitting you were behind the abductions?" Evelyn tilted her head. "I'm saying I was involved. The broker needed materials, minds untouched by cynicism. Innocence is, unfortunately, perishable." Lena stepped forward, horror plain on her face. "That's monstrous." "It's necessary," Evelyn said sharply. "You saw what the artifact can do, Lena. You felt it. That kind of power doesn't come without sacrifice." Wren stood, trembling. "You used me, fed me fragments, kept me just close enough to lose myself chasing ghosts." "No," Evelyn said. "You did that. You hunted with blinders, Thomas. I merely gave the trail a little perfume." Mars grabbed Wren's arm before he lunged. "Don't." But Evelyn didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her perfume subtle and spiced, like incense clinging to old parchment. She was smiling now. "Do you want to know why you couldn't find them?" she whispered. "Because you were looking in the wrong world. Some of them weren't taken here. They were taken through." Lena's breath caught. "You mean the mirror?" "The mirror is a conduit, a doorway. Marietta knew that. She stepped too close. She saw something on the other side. That's why she had to disappear." Wren's voice was a low growl. "What did you do to her?" "I saved her," Evelyn said, eyes gleaming. "And you, my dear, what will you do now?" Lena didn't speak. Her heart pounded in her throat. She could feel the weight of the past closing around her like a net. She had once stood beside Evelyn in admiration, awed by her brilliance. But this woman before her wasn't a mentor. She was a monster dressed in silk and citations. She offered her a small, handheld device, a remote. You can open the cell, let Thomas and Mars go, walk away, or you can stay and learn what I know. Join me fully. There's still time. Wren stared at Lena. Don't. She's lying. Evelyn laughed. Oh, Thomas, I've never lied. I just never told the whole truth. Lena's fingers brushed the remote. Her eyes flicked to Mars, bloodied, breathing heavily. Then to Wren, who was barely holding himself together, trembling under the weight of 7 broken years and a past he'd never truly buried. In the end, it wasn't a choice. It was a confession. She pressed the button. The magnetic lock clicked. The door behind Evelyn opened with a muted whine. Wren blinked. You. Take him. Run. Now. Evelyn stepped back, stunned for just a moment. Then her expression hardened. You fool. But it was too late. Mars pulled Wren by the collar, dragging him past Evelyn into the hallway. Alarms began to blare, distant at first, then deafening. The guards shouted something unintelligible. Lights flashed red. Lena stood still, back to Evelyn, who hissed, You'll regret this. I already do, Lena whispered. And then she turned and fled after them, into chaos, into smoke, into whatever came next. The house had not changed, but the silence inside it had grown thicker, like fog that remembered every scream. Marietta Drovyovska's home loomed on the edge of the wooded lane like a relic abandoned by time. Ivy coiled up its brick throat, and the shutters hung crooked, like half-closed eyes reluctant to witness the truth any longer. Wren stood at the gate, the cold wind threading fingers through his coat. Every breath he took came slow, measured, as if each inhale might trigger something sleeping inside. He hadn't meant to come here. After the escape, after Lena's betrayal turned salvation, and sirens and smoke and Evelyn's parting promise ringing in his skull, he had wandered. And then, without logic, he found himself here, drawn, pulled, to the mirror. The house creaked as he stepped inside. His boots thudded dully on the floorboards, softened by the dust of undisturbed weeks. Shafts of moonlight knifed through the torn curtains, revealing motes swirling in languid spirals. Wren moved with the gravity of a man walking through memory. This was where it had started after all. Marietta had disappeared from this house, not the streets, not some hidden lab or ritual site. Here, her bedroom, her mirror. He passed the foyer with its broken grandfather clock, its hollow eyes of its face stuck forever at 3:17, the time she'd last been seen. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and mildew, a contradiction, like everything about this place. Up the stairs, each step a throb in his knees, his back, his heart. The door was still ajar. Her bedroom was a mausoleum, a shrine to the unfinished. Books frozen mid-read on the nightstand, a music box open but silent, pillows sunken from nights long gone. And there, against the far wall, stood the mirror, tall, arched, ornate, a Victorian monstrosity that dominated the room like a second occupant. The glass rippled faintly in the dim light, as though it breathed. Wren approached slowly. The first time he saw this mirror, it had shown him nothing but his own face, cracked, tired, searching. Now it shimmered faintly, and something stirred behind the reflection. Marietta? he whispered. He wasn't expecting an answer, but the mirror twitched. He stepped back, pulse racing.
Mars was dying. That much was clear. He lay on the worn couch in Lena's study, his coat blood-soaked and bunched beneath him. His breath came in shallow pulls, and his skin had taken on a pallor that looked more like ash than flesh. But his eyes were sharp, almost feverishly alive. Wren sat across from him, his hands twitching, helpless. He had stitched bullet wounds before. He had seen men bleed out on dirty floors and cold sidewalks. But this felt different. This was personal. "Mars," he said softly, "you need a hospital. No time, no doctors. Only truth." Lena hovered nearby, compress in hand, jaw clenched. Her presence was a sharp counterpoint, clinical, restrained. But even she could not hide the tension in her shoulders. "You've got maybe minutes, so if you've got something to say, Mars, say it." Mars' lip curled. "Always the scientist, Holloway. You still believe this can be measured?" Lena said nothing. Wren leaned forward. "You knew about Marietta, about Evelyn, about all of it?" Mars closed his eyes, chest rising with effort. "I was her handler." "Whose?" Wren snapped. "Evelyn's?" "Both of them," Mars murmured. "Evelyn recruited me first, back when the mirror was still a theory, back when it was just a cracked thing in a forgotten manor. She thought it was a portal. I thought it was a lie." He coughed, wet and harsh. "But then Marietta found it, and something happened. She wasn't just pulled into it, she resonated with it. It sang to her. She was the key." Wren's heart pounded. "So you let her vanish?" "I didn't let anything. I tried to stop her." He blinked hard, forcing words out. "But Evelyn, she wanted to push it further. She wanted to test what it would show us. And Marietta volunteered." "Bullshit," Wren growled. "She wouldn't have left without telling someone." "She didn't mean to disappear. She meant to see. But the mirror doesn't show. It takes. And when she touched it, she fell through. And Evelyn locked it down." Lena finally spoke, her voice cold. "So you covered it up?" Mars nodded weakly. "She said it was to protect the project, that Wren would destroy the evidence if he knew, that you," she looked at Lena, "would side with him." I believed her. Wren stood, fists clenched. "You let me lose everything, my career, my sanity, while you ran missions with the woman who orchestrated it all?" "She kept me on a leash. I thought I could outplay her. I was wrong." His voice was fraying now, breath whistling between words. "But I found something," Mars whispered, eyes locking on Wren's. He reached slowly into his jacket, hand trembling, and pulled out a folded piece of parchment, old, stained, covered in symbols. He pressed it into Wren's palm. "She thinks the artifact is the key, but it's not the object. It's the resonance. The mirror only responds to people who've touched the other side." Wren's voice dropped. "You mean the artifact reacts to people who've already been affected by it?" Mars nodded. "And that's why it wants you now." Wren staggered back. No, I've only seen it. I haven't." "You have," Mars interrupted. "Back in Marietta's room. You didn't just see her. You crossed, even for a second. You're marked." Silence settled. Lena looked from Wren to Mars.
So what now? Mars gave a weak smile. Now? I die. Wren kneeled beside him. No, there's still time. There isn't, Mars whispered. But listen, the canary doesn't sing to survive. It sings to warn. He touched Wren's wrist, eyes boring into his. Don't follow her without knowing what's on the other side. Then he exhaled. Long, soft, final. Lena checked his pulse, shook her head. Wren stared at the parchment in his hands. Lines of strange script twisted across its surface, surrounding a symbol he had seen before, etched into the frame of the mirror. It pulsed once under his fingers, faintly warm. Lena sat heavily on the chair across from him. Do you believe him? I don't know what to believe anymore, Wren whispered. But if he's right, then the mirror isn't just showing the past. It's choosing, Lena said, and it's chosen me.
Thomas Wren stood alone in the flickering half-light of his study, the air thick with cigarette smoke and static tension. The walls were papered with scraps of evidence, faded photographs, annotated letters, floor plans blackened by time and obsession. Red thread linked faces to names, names to places, and all of it to the one that refused to let him rest, Marietta Dravovska. At the center of the web, tacked beneath her picture, a sliver of scorched brass caught the light, a fragment of the bedroom mirror. It pulsed with something that defied explanation, as though it remembered everything he had forgotten. Weeks had passed since Lena Holloway's confession and Mars Grady's near-fatal escape. Wren had felt himself unraveling, his certainty buckling beneath the weight of the unreal. But something had shifted. Beneath the exhaustion, a renewed purpose coiled in his gut, lean, sharp, and furious. He was done chasing shadows. The pieces were there. The artifact, the mirror, Marietta's disappearance, Evelyn Rausch, 17 Elm Street. The address that had haunted the edges of every buried document and erased case file. A place that, according to city records, did not exist, and yet it called to him like a pulse beneath the skin of the world. Mars was healing, slowly. The man who once operated in the quiet margins of espionage now sat hunched beneath a blanket in Lena's townhouse, colorless and tired, but alert. Wren visited often, asking for details, scraps of memory. Mars spoke little, but when he did, it was with the precision of a scalpel. He had been a cellar, he said, a room that hummed with something beneath language, a door that didn't open yet somehow let things out. Every word added weight to the theory Wren could no longer ignore. Evelyn wasn't studying the artifact, she was using it, and Marietta had been the first key. When Lena returned, she brought with her more than apologies. Her hands trembled as she set a weathered lockbox on the table, the contents hissing with old dust and half-translated madness. Scrolls, diagrams, fragments of doctrine from an old cult older than the artifact itself, one that believed reality was a construct, a fragile skin stretched thin over something far more dangerous. The mirror isn't just a tool, she whispered, eyes wide with something like awe or dread. It's a wound, and Evelyn means to widen it. That night, the three of them, a wounded spy, a disgraced academic, and a detective who had seen too much, sat around a table littered with ritual sigils and building schematics, planning a break-in not into a house, but into something far more volatile. Lena provided the theory, glyphs that could anchor consciousness, rituals to delay spatial collapse. Mars recalled the layout as best he could, the curvature of halls that didn't obey geometry, the central chamber where Evelyn kept the mirror now fully active. Wren orchestrated the rest, drawing on intuition sharpened by grief and fury. They weren't just seeking answers anymore. They were preparing for war. The forest that cradled 17 Elm Street was quiet when they arrived. The path that led to the house seemed freshly formed,
the earth soft and faintly warm. Ahead, the house loomed, not decaying but unfinished, as though still being imagined. Its walls shimmered, lines shifting subtly when not directly watched. Wren felt his breath catch. This wasn't a structure. It was a construct, a theater of belief made solid by ritual and madness. "Whatever we find in there," Wren said, voice low, "we hold on to each other. We don't let go." Mars gave a dry, cracked clutter. "And if we don't come back? Then at least we won't be alone," Lena answered.
The storm outside had become apocalyptic. Thunder shattered the sky with the sound of old gods waking, and rain lashed against the glass like 1,000 desperate hands. Inside the Droskaya house, time had begun to come apart. The air tasted electric, frayed at the edges, as though reality itself were being rewound and rethreaded with trembling hands. Thomas Wren stood in the bedroom where it had all begun, the mirror looming before him like a doorway no one should walk through. Evelyn Rausch was already there, her silhouette lit only by the occasional flash of lightning and the pulsing glow of the activated artifact in her hand. Its fractured facets gleamed with unnatural color, casting broken rainbows onto the walls, which seemed to pulse in time with her breathing. "You shouldn't have come alone," Evelyn said, without turning. "I didn't," Wren replied. "I brought the truth with me." The mirror responded. Its surface stirred, no longer reflective, but alive. Images swirled within it, flickering fragments of memories, moments that never happened or had happened differently. Marietta smiling, screaming, disappearing. Lena as a child touching the glass. Mars watching from a dark corner. And Wren himself. Dozens of him in different clothes, different eras, different expressions, all versions of choices not made. "I've seen enough lies," Wren said, stepping forward. "It's time to see everything." Evelyn turned, her eyes rimmed with tears and fury. "This isn't about lies. It's about possibility. The mirror doesn't show you what was. It shows you what could still be. You saw her. You saw Marietta. She's in there, Thomas." "No," he said. "What's in there is grief wearing 1,000 masks." A thunderclap shook the house. The walls moaned, the floor beneath their feet twisted slightly, as if uncertain it wanted to stay horizontal. Furniture shifted places when no one was looking, paintings blinked. Hallways rewrote themselves. The house was unraveling, or perhaps revealing its true form, a convergence point of timelines held together only by memory and pain. Wren steadied himself and looked into the mirror. This time, he let it in. Visions hit him like waves, the moment Marietta touched the artifact and vanished. Evelyn holding her as she screamed, not in fear but in awe. Lena burying the broken shards of the mirror beneath floorboards, whispering words in an ancient tongue. Wren himself standing at the edge of a reality that no longer recognized him. He staggered backward, breath caught in his throat. He gasped. "It's not a mirror. It's a lens, a gate, a compression of what might be." Evelyn stepped closer, holding the artifact above her head like a conductor's baton. "And now it's awake. With this," she said, her hand trembling, "we can choose. We can rebuild." But rebuild what? A dream? A lie? A world where the dead still breathe, but no one remembers why they died? The mirror flared. A vortex opened in its depths. The wind in the room turned inwards, pulling time, space, identity into its core. The walls dissolved, and suddenly they were no longer standing in a bedroom. They were in a cathedral of reflections, each surface showing a different life. Marietta alive, Evelyn alone, Lena never joining the project, Mars watching from a dark corner, and Wren himself, dozens of him in different clothes, different eras, different expressions, all versions of choices not made. "You could be anything," Evelyn whispered, stepping into the swirl. "You could undo it all." But Wren didn't move. He understood now. The mirror didn't offer healing, only escape. It offered infinite chances to avoid the pain of living with the truth. "I don't need to undo it. I need to face it." Then he turned and for the first time walked away from the mirror, not because he feared what was inside, but because he finally understood it wasn't where the answers lay. Behind him, Evelyn faltered, hand still raised, her fingers loosened. The artifact dropped with a sound like breaking bone. The mirror convulsed and shattered, not into glass, but into light. Hundreds of timelines scattered like fireflies in the storm. The vortex closed, and the house exhaled. The storm outside began to pass. The rain softened. The walls stilled. Wren stood in the quiet, listening to the echo of what almost was, and what would never be again. The air inside Marietta Drovskaya's house was no longer just air. It shimmered, quivered and rippled like heat above asphalt, humming with the tremors of timelines folding in on themselves. Dust swirled in strange patterns, resisting gravity. Paint peeled backward on the walls. Portraits blinked. Hallways rewrote themselves. The house was groaning, a low guttural sound, like something ancient and wounded stirring from a deep sleep. Thomas Wren stood in the parlor, eyes locked on the ornate mirror looming like a gateway into some unseen dimension. Cracks spiderwebbed across its once pristine surface, but within its depths pulsed a vortex of light and shadow, memory and possibility. Behind him, the storm outside raged with unrelenting fury, but it was the storm inside the mirror that truly mattered. He clutched the artifact tighter, an obsidian pendant now burning cold against his palm. He had finally understood. The mirror was never just a mirror. It was a breach, a wound in the fabric of reality, and the artifact was its key. Together, they had undone Marietta Drovskaya, pulling her from time's flow into a liminal plane beyond comprehension. That same fate now threatened to engulf them all. Dr. Lena Holloway's voice crackled over the intercom. "Thomas, the foundation's cracking. We have minutes, maybe less." "Noted," Wren muttered, gaze never leaving the mirror. Footsteps thundered behind him. Mars Grady, limping but determined, blood drying on his temple. "Evelyn's heading for the east wing. She's got something. I think she means to finish it." "Then we don't have minutes. We have seconds." A loud groan echoed through the walls. Floorboards heaved. The chandelier above them shuddered, its crystal teardrops clinking a nervous lullaby. Wren turned and ran. The east wing of the house had been untouched for years, abandoned, sealed off after Marietta's disappearance. But now it pulsed with unnatural light, as if the house was alive and its heart had begun to beat again. Every step closer was like walking through syrup. Time bent and twisted. One hallway became two, then one again. Paintings morphed, their subjects whispering silent warnings. Thunder cracked overhead and underneath. When Wren burst through the heavy doors of the master bedroom, he found Evelyn Rausch standing before the mirror, her silhouette a broken statue against the storm-lit window behind her. Her hands were raised, fingers splayed wide, holding the artifact aloft like a priestess invoking a forgotten god. Her eyes burned with grief and fury. "You don't understand," she screamed over the roar. "Marietta promised me. I saw her. I can bring her back." "She's not here, Evelyn," Wren said, stepping cautiously closer. "You saw an echo, a reflection twisted by your need. She spoke to me. She remembered. She knew my name." Wren held out his hand. "Whatever she was, whatever this thing showed you, it wasn't real. You've seen what it does. You know what it takes." The mirror flared, and Wren caught a glimpse of it. A dozen versions of Evelyn, all flickering like candle flames. Some were sobbing, others screaming, one laughing maniacally. One was already dead. Behind him, Mars and Lena burst in. The doctor's breath hitched as she saw Evelyn's form glowing with refracted light, the mirror's vortex tugging at the edges of her reality. "She's bonded to it. If she completes the link, she won't." But he wasn't sure. The mirror surged, and Evelyn leapt.
The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered. Ash hung in the morning air like the last breath of a dream. The once imposing Drovskaya estate now stood gutted, its facade crumbling under the weight of secrets unearthed. The mirror was gone, broken, silenced, but its shadow stretched long across the hearts of those who had survived its unraveling of reality. Thomas Wren sat on the stone steps leading down from the veranda, head bowed, fingers threading slowly through a cup of now cold coffee. The house behind him felt more mausoleum than home. The walls whispered, though not in voices anymore, just creaks and sighs, like old bones settling after a long, cruel winter. From somewhere inside, he heard Marietta Drovskaya's footsteps. She walked as if learning the shape of her own existence again. Her time beyond the mirror had not left scars, at least none visible. Her face bore the same angular grace, her eyes still that sharp Baltic gray. And yet, something essential had shifted. She had returned, yes, but she was not the woman who had vanished. "Thomas," she said softly, standing beside him. He looked up. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Do you believe in souls?" Thomas didn't answer right away. The wind stirred through the tall pines at the edge of the property, rustling leaves like paper ghosts. "I believe in memory," he said finally, "and regret." Marietta nodded, accepting the answer as one who had forgotten how to expect more. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. "The things I saw on the other side, they weren't just dreams. They were alternate truths. Every moment I could have chosen differently, every fracture of possibility. They all lived there." "And Evelyn?" Wren asked low. "She was there too, but twisted. Not as she was, but as she might have become, or maybe always had been." They sat in silence, broken only by the slow cry of distant gulls and the hum of insects returning to life in the overgrown garden. Inside the remnants of the house, Dr. Lena Holloway was compiling her notes, not for a paper or a lecture, but for herself. Pages littered the desk, charts of electromagnetic readings, sketched timelines and mirror surface resonance patterns. But they were dwarfed by a single page pinned to the wall, blank except for one handwritten line. There are truths that science will never calibrate. She stared at it for a long time. The foundations of her life, academic, rational, methodical, had been shaken. The mirror had shown her a version of herself who never stopped to question, never dared to feel. And in doing so, it had cracked something open. She had always believed emotion to be the enemy of clarity. But now, she found clarity only through the ache in her chest. She closed her journal and stepped out into the corridor. Somewhere, Evelyn Rausch was being processed, booked, and interrogated. Her empire of manipulation had collapsed like a house of cards in a downpour. But even now, she couldn't summon hatred for her. Pity, perhaps, or sorrow for what desperation had twisted Evelyn into. In the far wing of the estate, what remained of it, Marcellus Grady stood in front of a shattered window, cigarette burning low between his fingers. The glass crunched underfoot as he stepped across the room that had once served as the estate's ballroom. Now moonlight leaked through cracks in the roof, painting silver scars on the marble floor. His phone had gone dead days ago. No calls from the underworld contacts he once wielded like weapons. No coded messages. No favors owed. They had all severed ties the moment Evelyn's network fell apart. Mars had spent a lifetime moving in shadows, and now the shadows had abandoned him. He exhaled, the smoke curling like a question mark in the air. He had nothing left to bargain with, no favors to cash, no names to whisper in exchange for protection. But perhaps, for the first time, he had something else, a chance to begin. Maybe not redemption, but release. They reconvened at twilight. The sky was awash of watercolor orange and fading violet. Birds flew low, dipping toward the hills. On the cracked veranda, the four of them stood, Thomas, Marietta, Lena, and Mars, bound not by destiny or loyalty, but something far older, the mutual ache of survival. The artifact had been locked away in a lead-lined case, guarded under the jurisdiction of no known agency, but many whispered ones. Lena had argued for its destruction. Wren had disagreed, not out of reverence, but caution. You couldn't unwrite something like that, but you could learn from it, guard it. Marietta stepped forward, her fingers brushing the case's lid. Do you think it's still aware? No, Lena said. It was a conduit, not a mind. But its resonance, it left impressions. Mars scoffed. You all speak like it was magic. It was a weapon. It was both, Wren replied, which is why it can't fall into the hands of either scientists or soldiers. So what now? Mars asked, flicking his cigarette into the dusk. We bury it in a vault and pretend none of this happened? No, Wren said. We remember. And so they did. That night they lit a fire in the ruined hearth, not out of ritual, but need. The house still breathed, if only faintly. As flames danced on stone and wood, Marietta told stories from her lost days. Lena spoke of theories she now dared to abandon. Mars, reluctantly, shared fragments of a life he thought no one would ever hear. Wren listened, then added his own, a boy who had once stood before a mirror and asked who he was, and who, after everything, was beginning to find the answer. Outside, the wind shifted. The trees, for the first time in days, were still. In the embers, reflections danced, but no longer fractured, just whole.
6 months had passed since the night the mirror fractured space and truth alike. The air was different now, not calmer, not exactly, but settled, like the stillness that comes after a seismic shift when the earth holds its breath and begins the slow work of reshaping itself. In a quiet government facility buried deep in the desert, a single room remained under 24-hour surveillance. It was windowless, silent but for the hum of halogen lights. The walls were a dull institutional gray, intentionally absent of reflection. At the center of the room, on a pedestal surrounded by concentric rings of sensors, sat the bedroom mirror. It no longer screamed. It pulsed, softly, irregularly, like the slowed heartbeat of something sleeping but not dead. Occasionally, shapes formed on the glass. Not images exactly, shadows that almost resembled people, places, moments, uncapturable, unrepeatable. Observed only in passing by weary technicians who had long given up trying to explain what they saw. Some windows, it seemed, never fully closed. In a modest Cambridge office layered with books and chalk-dusted diagrams, Dr. Lena Holloway scribbled symbols across a whiteboard. The equations ran between theoretical physics and archaeology, peppered with marginalia. Ancient glyphs and quantum notations merged like puzzle pieces. Her students had taken to calling her the quantum anthropologist. She didn't mind. Gone were her neat lectures on Bronze Age cultures. Instead, she lectured now on nonlinear time, cultural memory encoded in artifacts, and the possibility, however fringe, of trans-dimensional resonance. No one laughed. Not anymore. The mirror had shown her something that lingered in the periphery of her waking thoughts, a version of herself in another room, another reality, screaming into a mirror that did not scream back. That image haunted her, not as fear, but as fuel. She believed now that certain objects, like the bedroom mirror, acted as nexus points, not portals, not magic, simply ruptures, where consciousness pooled across probabilities, where time folded like cloth. Her research would not bring her peace, but perhaps, she hoped, it would bring clarity. Across the Atlantic, in a cramped Berlin studio lined with canvases and LED scanners, Marcellus Grady leaned over a forged Rubens painting with a jeweler's loupe pressed to his eye. He hadn't touched a stolen artifact in months. Now his hands served the law, though grudgingly, as he worked with international agencies to identify and expose counterfeit art. It was less lucrative, but it was cleaner. And in the spaces between brushstrokes, he found something strange, beauty, uncorrupted. Sometimes he thought of Evelyn, of her cold certainty, of how close he had come to following her into the dark. But then he'd return to the canvas, studying the layers, the pigments, the time it took for truth to settle beneath deception. Art, he realized, was just another mirror. And Evelyn Rausch? She sat in a high-security cell, carved into the hillside of a classified site, hands folded neatly on a stainless steel table. Her gaze, as always, was sharp, measured, undiminished. The world knew her now as a disgraced collector, a manipulator of antiquities and people alike. But in her mind, she had only pursued what others were too afraid to touch. To the officials who questioned her, she offered nothing. But when the young analyst, with trembling hands, slipped her a photo of a fragmented statuette found in Mongolia, half obsidian, half mirror-like crystal, Evelyn smiled. "There are more," she said softly. "So many more." The room chilled slightly, as though the air recognized her truth. And Thomas Wren? Wren was walking again, along another fog-wrapped coastline, the Pacific this time, the air briny and electric. His office in San Francisco bore no sign, just a cracked door with frosted glass etched faintly with Wren Investigations, inquiries into the unsolvable. People found him. They came with stories that defied logic, objects that glowed in moonlight, disappearances with no entry points, voices heard through stone. He listened. He asked the right questions, and sometimes
Just sometimes, he helped them see that truth and madness were not opposites, but neighbors. Wren no longer sought closure. He had made peace with the unknown. Each morning, he carried a battered notebook and a camera with black and white film. He documented small things now, reflections in puddles, cracks in subway tiles, the echo of footsteps when no one followed. The world, he had discovered, was always talking. One just had to know how to listen. One evening, just past midnight, Wren received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo, grainy, taken from a surveillance camera in the facility housing the bedroom mirror. The image showed the mirror's surface illuminated not with shadows, but with a clear silhouette. It was a man, walking a foggy coast, hat tilted, hands in his coat pockets. Wren stared at the image for a long time, a quiet shiver climbing his spine. And he folded it carefully, slid it into his notebook, and stepped outside. The fog was thick that night, curling like memory. The ocean whispered its ageless riddles, and far in the distance, lightning flickered, brief and blue, like a signal. And Wren, the man who once believed only in hard evidence, followed the path ahead with steady steps. He did not look back, because he knew now some windows weren't meant to be closed, only watched. The coastal pub sat cradled between cliffside and sea, its battered shingles and salt-stained walls defiant against the wind's relentless whisper. Inside, the amber light glowed soft and low, like memory distilled through a tumbler of aged whiskey. The windows rattled with the breath of the ocean, and the wooden floorboards creaked under each slow footstep, as if the building itself was settling into an old story, one last time. At a corner booth near the window, 3 figures sat hunched over their drinks. Thomas Wren sipped a stout the color of midnight, its foam clinging to the edges of his glass like ghostly fingerprints. His trench coat hung over the back of his chair, still damp from the walk down the coastal path. Salt water curled in his hair. He stared past the room, eyes fixed on something neither outside nor in, as if measuring the horizon for something it had long since swallowed. Dr. Lena Holloway nursed a red wine, half full, half forgotten. Her hands, once always in motion, sketching, underlining, testing, rested calmly in her lap. She wore a threadbare cardigan over a blouse stained with ink, and her gaze flickered between her companions, her mind ticking in quantum patterns, particle and wave, now and then. Marcellus Mars Grady spun an empty shot glass slowly between his fingers, the surface of the glass catching and distorting the candlelight. His sleeves were rolled, his jacket nowhere to be seen, and the tattoo on his forearm, an Ouroboros, glinted faintly, the ink aged but persistent. He wore the look of a man who had lost the hunger for chaos, but still tasted its echo in his bones. For a long time, they sat in silence, not an awkward one, but the kind shared by people who had faced death, madness, and each other, and come out breathing, though not unchanged. "I used to think reality was just," she said eventually, voice low, "something static, bound by logic, material, proof." She smiled bitterly, tracing the rim of her glass. "But now I wonder if truth isn't just the consensus of perception, a story we agreed to believe together." Mars chuckled, the sound dry and warm. "You sound like Evelyn." "I sound nothing like Evelyn," she shot back, but not unkindly. "She wanted control, domination through deception. I just want to understand." Wren exhaled through his nose, the ghost of a laugh. "And I just want to sleep without seeing versions of myself I can't explain." They nodded, and the candle between them flickered, as if eavesdropping. Outside, a wave struck the rocks with a muffled boom, and droplets of sea mist clung to the pane beside them, catching the dim light like tears. Mars leaned forward, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. You ever think we were chosen? That the mirror, whatever it was, didn't just show us what was possible? Maybe it shaped us, like a prism shaping light. Lena raised a brow. You think the mirror had intent? I think, Mars said, staring into his empty glass, that maybe intent doesn't have to be conscious. Maybe reality nudges the ones who are already leaning. Wren stirred, setting his drink down with a soft thud.